Welcome back to the series where I'm ranking every single episode of each Doctor's era. Today we're going to be doing the 5th Doctor, played by Peter Davison. Peter Davison's Doctor was one of the earlier Doctors that I watched, because a lot of people recommended him to me because they reminded him of David Tennant's portrayal of the Doctor. And I can see certain similarities in the two. I also like that there is a bit more of a family dynamic, so the characters are always interacting. It's a little bit more soap opera-y, which I guess aligned more with the new series at that time when I started watching. So let's jump straight into it with Castrovalva. For years, I wasn't really a big fan of the story. I felt it was a bit boring, and I found Peter Davison's impersonation of previous Doctors to be really cringe, and I just don't think I fully grasped what they were trying to do. But as the years have gone on and I've watched it a few more times, I feel like I'm starting to get it, and I actually quite enjoy it. I think with these post-regeneration stories, it's hard not to compare the pair. You know, something like Power of the Daleks or Speared from Space are both so brilliant, and then this one just kind of is there. But I feel like it leads on from Logopolis really well tonally. You know, they both have this vibe of this is off, and there's something wrong going on here. And, you know, everything in the Zero Room and how much he's relying on his companions to look after him, especially Tegan, who he just met. You know, it's really, really interesting. Next up, we have Four to Doomsday, which is fine. I think it's a solid story that works. It's just not overly exciting to me. I think the scene where the Doctor is suspended in space and uses the cricket ball to use the momentum to push him towards the TARDIS is one of the greatest scenes in Doctor Who. And you can see why scenes like that would influence the new series. You know, maybe that's an effect they couldn't completely pull off back then, but I think it works as it is. And I think having the cricket ball for the 5th Doctor just adds a little bit of a weird bit of character to him that I really like. Next up, we have Kinder. This is a story I flip-flop on, but I know at its core, it's brilliant. It's one of those stories that is so different to anything that came before in Doctor Who. And, you know, the Mara are an incredible invention that is exclusive to the 5th Doctor's era. You know, it's something that really works with his team. And I love the relationship the Mara and Tegan have as well, where they're still always haunting her in the back of her mind. You know, they're really, really creepy. And, you know, with the new CGI snakes as well in Kinder is just really scary. You know, snakes are a bit spooky. I love all the dream sequences as well. They're all really different and experimental, and I love when Doctor Who tries to go down that road. Next up, we have The Visitation. For some reason, I love this story. I love the pterodactyls, and I love when they go to Victorian London and that beautiful location where they filmed in for it is just amazing. And I think it's one of those stories that just has a really good tone to it. I love the addition of the Highwayman and his like scheming and brilliant voice, and I just think it adds like a real nice element to it. Next up, we have Black Orchid. This is a story that's, to me, feels like fan fiction. It feels like something I would have read on Tumblr back in like 2010. You know, it just has that nice little quality of like the Doctor and companions have landed this nice little place and they all just hang out and have a good time, whilst there's also like a murder going on and this mystery. I think it being only 2 episodes is probably enough for what the story has to tell. It's a nice, clean 2-parter, and it's really nice. And I think it's a nice, like, summer afternoon watch. Next up is Earthshock. Earthshock is clearly the highlight of this season and one of the highlights of Peter Davison's era. It's not only the return of the Cybermen after Revenge of the Cybermen being their final appearance, which wasn't the best representation of the Cybermen in my opinion, but this story really brought them back as a real big force to be reckoned with. Although I think they are moving slowly towards me being more of a robotic army rather than these converting, spooky, lumbering things. I really enjoy this interpretation of the Cybermen, and I really enjoy David Banks' performance of the Cybermen. And also, this episode really defines Adric as a character. You know, the idea of his shocking death at the end is like one of the most pivotal and most remembered moments throughout the entire classic series. And it's one of those things that has ramifications even to modern day Doctor Who. You know, we have Peter Davison's final words being Adric, And in The Power of the Doctor, Tegan and the Doctor are talking about Adric still. Like, it still is something that keeps coming up. Next up, we have Time-Flight. This one is not for me. This is something that I am not interested in whatsoever. It looks cheap and the story isn't overly exciting. It just feels like John Nathan Turner wanted to go on the Concorde and that's it. You know, it's just not the type of Doctor Who I enjoy. It's another one of those cases where the budget just doesn't stretch for this program. Next up, we have Arc of Infinity. And I think I rate this story higher than other people do because I can really see the potential this story has, even though I don't think it's executed very well. Because, you know, the reveal of Omega and who's working with him isn't really given a build-up. It's kind of obvious. And, you know, it feels like it's not engaging with its mysteries very deeply because it needs to stretch out to 4 episodes. So you have to fill those scenes with something. So we've got to set it up in a way that makes it really obvious who it is, you know, and that I feel like a disservice to the story itself. I love the location of it filming in Amsterdam. I love the return of Omega. I love the 2 gay Australian boys. And I think it's a good return for Tegan. Next up, we have Snakedance. I've put this in the good category because it's not as good as Kinder, but there is a lot of great elements to the story that makes it still really good. I think the issue with Snakedance is that there's too many ideas going on that it loses its focus. And I think if it was a bit more focused, it would have been way better than Kinder. And I love seeing Tegan once again encountering a villain that is out to get her. And I think that's the type of stuff that I like about this era is that you'll get Tegan, she'll have an actual storyline that's hers, you know, and you don't really get that too often in the classic series. Next up is Mordrin Undead. This story, unfortunately, is not for me. Once again, it has all the right ingredients. You know, you've got the Brigadier coming back, Turlo the Twink coming into the show. You've got a bunch of people who are trying to take Time Lord technology and regenerate themselves. And it has all the right elements, but once again, it feels like there's too many ideas and it's not focused enough for me to really enjoy it. That it becomes kind of convoluted and it feels like a bunch of scenes have been stuck together rather than one cohesive story. But I feel like that's just me because a lot of people seem to love this one, so I'm happy to be the outlier. Next up is Terminus. Of course, I put this at the bottom because Nyssa leaves and she should never have left, obviously. But yeah, there's nothing about this story that I overly enjoy. I don't like that they get Nyssa to strip in it. I think that's really demeaning and it doesn't make any sense within the narrative. And it's just really gross, really, you know, don't do that to my poor girl Nyssa. I like that it has a big dog in it and that's all I have to say. Next up, we have Enlightenment. Now, Enlightenment is one of the best in the Peter Davison's era. It is such a beautiful story. It is one of those ones that I like to describe as being romantic. The idea of these sailing ships flying through space is such a beautiful image. And I think they do a really good job at it in the originals. And I also don't mind the new CGI version that they did for the most recent collection set. But I think it still works, especially with the amazing performances attached to it. Captain Rack is one of my favourite additions to Doctor Who ever. She's so funny and I love her. And I love all this Black Guardian trilogy with, you know, Turlo not really sure which side he's going to be on because he only just puts his interests first. I find that interesting. And there's a real sense of dread throughout his whole run. Like he's so confused about what to do. The thing I love about the Black and White Guardian in the classic series is that there's this emphasis on these two people are holding the universe in balance at all the time. As of recording this, they have not returned to the new series. I've recorded this before the new series, so I don't know if they've returned, but they would be an obvious thing to bring back for the current run when we're talking about gods, because they are gods. But yeah, Enlightenment is beautiful. And it takes its time with its mystery. It doesn't reveal straight away what's going on, and the reveal is beautiful and brilliantly done. So yeah, great story, brilliantly directed, brilliantly written. Love this one. Next up is The King's Demons. This story is fine. It's a nice, sweet little one, but it's one of those weird stories where, like, in the script, it probably would have made a lot more sense with the Master disguising himself. But in this, it's so obvious that it's Anthony Ainley. I don't think that tricked anyone that was secretly the Master. You know, so Relying on that reveal doesn't really work. And Chameleon does not work at all. Like, that was such a misstep. I don't know what they were thinking. They were excited by the marketing potential of it. I'm sure it would have generated content, but it's not, but it didn't work. But it just didn't work. And sometimes things that generate content don't work. Let's just say that. Beautiful location filming. Love all the costumes. The BBC do historical dramas so well. Next up, we have the 5 Doctors. I'm putting this at the top, and is it the world's best written story of all time? No, but is it fun? Yes. And that's the point of it. Unlike the 3 Doctors where I feel like they were trying to tell a real story with it, the 5 Doctors is really just a celebration. And I think that's the reason why the 5 Doctors works, because it's a once-off. I don't think they can recreate this magic ever again. I just don't think it has the vibe, especially now that we have like 20,000 Doctors. Like, how could you get all of them into one narrative? They struggle to get 5. It's a tough thing for a writer to do, but I think this story is really great. It's one of those stories that is endlessly rewatchable. It's just really, really good comfort viewing. And I've said this before on my channel a million times, but the 5 Doctors is a great taster if you're trying to introduce yourself to the classic series, to see what Doctor do you align with, what interests you, and then you can move on from there. So I definitely recommend the 5 Doctors. Next up, we have Warriors of the Deep. This story sees the return of the Silurians and the Sea Devils. And this, again, continues the problem I have with a lot of stories in this era, where there's no build-up and reveal of the villains. The Sea Devils and Silurians are just there. There's no like, oh my god, it's the Silurians, they're back, or anything like that. It doesn't do that. It just goes straight into it and just tells like an everyday story. And I think that's a real disservice. This story also suffers from the lack of moody lighting. And I can understand why it was light and bright, because in a realistic setting, it would be. But this is a piece of drama. This is a piece of television. It is not real life. And I think it would have been more interesting and more visually scary with some sense of atmosphere, because it lacks it completely. So yeah, it's a sad return for the Silurians and Sea Devils, because I love those monsters so much and I feel like they didn't really get a chance to shine. Also, their costumes just aren't as good as they were in the 70s, and that is just sad. Next up, we have The Awakening. The Awakening is just fine. I have no notes about it. It's a story I never think about. It's one that doesn't stay in my mind. It just kind of exists. So I have nothing to say about it. It's fine. Frontios. Oh, now this is a story. This is a story that is so well directed. It looks beautiful. It has an incredible planet design, and the imagery of the TARDIS exploding is just incredible. Peter Davison feels his most at ease in this story. There's something about his performance that feels so much more confident, and I just love this story. This is a story that I don't watch enough, and I feel like I really need to sit down and watch it again, because I loved this one. And I feel like a lot of people love this one, but it's one of those ones that people don't really talk about that often. But when they do, they're like, oh, that's brilliant. So I'm putting it up really high in order to convince myself to watch it again. Next up, we have Resurrection of the Daleks. This is a brilliant story as well. Really good run, these 2 stories in a row. And I think it's a good departure for Tegan, because, her departure of this stopped being fun is real. This did stop being fun. Pretty much everyone in the story dies. This is not a good time. This is not traveling around the universe and having a laugh. This is horrible. And I like that Tegan, being the headstrong person she is, she's like, enough is enough. I came back, but this is not what I came back for. My friends are all gone. What's going on? Why am I still here? And she leaves, and it's really, really great. Next up, we have Planet of Fire. This is a story that I've always just thought is okay. I don't hate it, but I don't love it. I think Perry has a great introduction. You instantly get what she's about. And having an American companion, even though she wasn't really American in real life, adds a different tone to the show, and she has a different perspective. Also, once again, another beautiful place to film. It looks beautiful. I don't think it's the Master's greatest story, but Anthony Ainley is always a good watch. He always is really enjoyable. So I don't mind this one. Next up is The Caves of Androzani. Now, what is left to be said about the story? It is so dark and so brilliant. And, Peter Davison's final cliffhanger, he's crashing into this planet. He's such a hero. It's Such a strong story. It's such a triumphant return for Robert Holmes as well. You know, he hasn't written for the show for a while, and he came back with like an electric script. And I just adore this story. One of the best regeneration stories. I don't think it's a controversial statement. I think most people would agree with that. And it's funny, this is another one of those stories that I don't watch very often because it's so good that I don't want to spoil it for myself. I want to savor it. That is so weird. Why am I like that? But then I'll go and watch like, I don't know, Time-Flight for the 20th time. Like, what am I doing to myself? Maybe I'm like a masochist or something. Maybe I hate myself or something. That's something to unpack at therapy. Well, that's the Fifth Doctor's era. As you can see, I haven't ranked a lot of his stories very high. The thing I like about the Fifth Doctor era is the relationships. Those are the things that happen in the background of these stories. I enjoy the bickering. I enjoy Nyssa and Tegan together. I enjoy Nyssa and Adric together and how, you know, he's like the annoying little brother and how they all can't stand him. You know, the family dynamics of this era are brilliant, but I don't include them as part of the entire story. The actual stories themselves are really hit and miss for me. But yeah, what do you think of the Fifth Doctor's era? Let me know in the comment section below. Tell me how wrong I am, because I'm sure I am very, very incorrect. And next week, we'll be talking about Colin Baker, one of my favorite Doctors. And I love his era, so make sure you stay tuned for that one. Okay. Don't forget to click below to subscribe to the official Josh Nair's YouTube channel.